Have you ever felt completely and utterly alone? That moment where it feels like every door has been slammed in your face, every voice of support has gone silent, and you're left standing in the wreckage of your own hopes, with no idea where to turn. We've all had a taste of rejection. We've all known disappointment. But can you imagine a day so painful, so humiliating, that you'd call it the single most difficult day of your entire life? For the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, that day was very real. It wasn't a battle where he was outnumbered, or a moment of private grief at home. It was a day he walked toward a glimmer of hope, only to be met with a hurricane of cruelty. Alone, bleeding, and cast out by everyone he turned to, he was driven from a city under a shower of stones, with nothing but his faith to shield him. But it's what he did in that moment of utter despair, in his absolute darkest hour, that gives us one of the most powerful stories of the human spirit. In the middle of all that pain, he didn't curse his enemies. He didn't ask for revenge. Instead, he turned to his Lord and made a prayer, a dua, so full of raw vulnerability, so pure and unshakable in its faith, that it moved the heavens. This is the story of that day, the story of the journey to Taif, and this is the prayer that turned a moment of total worldly defeat into a timeless lesson in belief and divine mercy. This is the prayer he made when the world turned against him. To really understand the crushing weight of that journey to Taif, we have to go back to Mecca, to the year 619 CE. This wasn't just any year. It's known in history as Am al-Huzn, the year of sorrow. For a decade, Prophet Muhammad had been calling his people to the simple, powerful truth of one God, and for that decade he'd faced ridicule and persecution from his own tribe, the Quraysh. But through it all, he had two unshakable pillars of support. The first was his beloved wife, Khadijah. She wasn't just his wife, she was his partner in every sense. The very first person to believe in his message, she was his confidant, his greatest source of strength, and his biggest supporter. When the world called him a liar, she confirmed his truth. When he felt doubt, she was his certainty. Her presence was his sanctuary, and in the year of sorrow, she passed away. The heart of his home went silent. Just weeks later, his second pillar of support crumbled. His uncle, Abu Talib, the man who had raised him since he was a boy, also died. Abu Talib hadn't accepted the new faith, but as the chief of their clan, his love for his nephew was fierce, and his protection was absolute. In the tribal world of Mecca, that protection meant everything. The Quraysh hated the message, but they didn't dare physically harm the Prophet in a way that would provoke his powerful uncle. With Abu Talib's death, that shield was gone. Can you imagine that feeling of vulnerability? The love of his life was gone. His tribal protector was gone. The emotional and political safeguards that had allowed the message of Islam to survive its infancy were suddenly stripped away. The persecution, which had been simmering for years, now boiled over. The streets of his own hometown became openly hostile. Insults were shouted, not whispered. The path forward seemed to be closing in. It was in this suffocating atmosphere that the Prophet looked beyond Mecca. He had to find a new sanctuary, a place where people might be willing to listen, where the seed of faith could be planted in more fertile soil. His gaze fell upon the city of Taif. Taif was a beautiful city in the mountains, about 70 kilometers from Mecca, known for its pleasant climate and influential tribes. The people of Taif had ties to the Quraysh, but maybe, just maybe, they would be different. Maybe their hearts would be more open. So with a heavy heart but a glimmer of hope, he made a decision. He would walk to Taif. Accompanied only by his loyal companion and adopted son, Zayd ibn Haritha, he set out on foot, leaving the city that had rejected him, in search of one that might welcome him. This wasn't a journey of conquest. It was a journey of profound hope, born from the depths of sorrow. The journey itself was an ordeal, a 70-kilometer walk across the rugged, unforgiving Arabian desert. Every step was an act of faith. With each mile that separated him from the bitterness of Mecca, the hope for a different reception in Taif must have grown. He wasn't just walking away from persecution, he was walking towards a lifeline. If the powerful tribe of Taif accepted Islam, it would change everything, providing the young Muslim community with the protection it so desperately needed. When they arrived, weary from the journey, the Prophet went straight to the city's leaders. He approached 3 brothers from the ruling family, Abdiyalil, Mas'ud, and Habib. He sat with them and, with the quiet dignity that always defined him, he delivered the message he had carried all this way. He invited them to worship the one true God and to walk a path of justice and compassion. What came next wasn't just a simple no, it was a storm of cruelty and contempt. The first brother sneered, "If God really sent you, then I might as well go tear down the cloth of the Kaaba." It was a jab meant to trivialize the very idea of his mission. The second was even more insulting. "Couldn't God find anyone else to send but you?" he mocked, attacking the Prophet's personal honor. The third brother wouldn't even engage. "I'm not speaking to you," he declared. "If you're a real prophet, you're too important for me to talk to. And if you're a liar, you're not worth talking to." They slammed the door shut from every possible angle. Though heartbroken by their mockery, the Prophet kept his composure. He saw their hearts were sealed and he had only one request. Since they were rejecting him, could they at least keep his visit a secret from his enemies in Mecca? He knew if word of this failure got back, the persecution would only get worse. But the leaders of Taif weren't satisfied with just rejecting him. They refused even this small courtesy. Instead, they decided to turn his pain into a public spectacle. They called out to the idlers and children of the city, stirring them up into a vicious mob. Their command was simple and brutal: drive this man out, and the mob was happy to obey. This is where the story shifts from painful rejection to outright horror. This is the day the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would later tell his wife Aisha was the hardest and most painful day of his life. The leader's insults were sharp, but the mob's actions were brutal. As the Prophet and Zayd turned to leave, the shouts and jeers began. Then the stones started flying. It wasn't just a few rocks. The leaders had lined the path out of the city, creating a terrifying gauntlet of hate that stretched for miles. Children were urged to join in, hurling stones with all their strength. The rocks hit his body, his legs, his feet. Zayd, ever loyal, desperately tried to shield the Prophet with his own body, taking blow after blow himself until his own head was wounded. But the attack was relentless. The Prophet was struck so many times that his feet began to bleed profusely. The blood ran so freely it soaked his sandals, sticking them to his wounded skin. When he stumbled and fell from the pain and exhaustion, the mob showed no mercy. They would pull him back to his feet and continue their cruel assault, driving him further and further away. This torture went on for kilometers. Every step was agony, every moment a fresh wave of humiliation. He had come offering them eternal salvation, and they repaid him with a shower of stones. Finally, exhausted and shattered, they escaped the mob, finding refuge miles outside the city in a private vineyard, where they collapsed in the shade. The jeering crowd was gone, replaced by the heavy silence of pain. Zayd was bleeding from his head. The Prophet's feet were covered in his own blood. The mission hadn't just failed, it had ended in an unimaginable disaster. By any human measure, this was the lowest point. Rejected by his own people, brutally assaulted by the people of Taif, with no power or influence, he had nowhere left on earth to turn. He was, by all worldly standards, utterly defeated. It's right here, sitting under that grapevine nursing his wounds, that the story pivots from human cruelty to divine majesty. It's here that Prophet Muhammad turns his face away from the creation that rejected him and turns his heart completely towards the Creator. And it's here that he utters one of the most beautiful and moving prayers in human history. In that moment of total weakness and pain, the Prophet didn't despair. He complained to God about his state, not about God's plan. He poured out his heart in an act of pure submission. His prayer, now known as the Dua of Taif, is a powerful lesson in faith. Raising his hands, he began, "O Allah, to you alone, I complain of my weakness, my lack of resources, and my humiliation before the people." He starts with pure, unfiltered honesty. He admits his weakness, his powerlessness, his humiliation. There's no pride here, just a man laying his broken state before his Lord. He continues, "O most merciful of those who show mercy, you are the Lord of the weak, and you are my Lord." Even in his pain, he calls on God's mercy. He identifies himself with all the weak and oppressed people of the world and affirms that God is their ultimate protector. Then comes the heart of the prayer. To whom do you leave me? To a distant person who receives me with hostility, or to an enemy to whom you have given power over me? This isn't a question of doubt. It's a plea for closeness. It's the cry of a heart that feels abandoned by the world, asking its creator, "Where do I belong now?" And then comes the most powerful line, the one that reveals the unshakable core of his faith. "If you are not angry with me, then I do not care, but your protection is more sufficient for me." Think about the spiritual strength in that statement. After being stoned and humiliated, his main concern isn't his own pain or reputation. His only concern is God's pleasure. He's saying, "Oh God, all of this is nothing to me, as long as it's not a sign that you're displeased. If this is just a test and you are with me, I can handle anything." He finishes the prayer by seeking refuge in God's divine light and submitting completely to his will, ending with the ultimate declaration of trust. "There is no power and no might except through you." As he finished, a small act of kindness broke through the darkness. The owners of the orchard, who had seen the chase from a distance, felt a moment of pity and sent their young Christian slave, a boy named Adas, with a plate of grapes. As the prophet reached for the grapes, he said what he always said before eating, "Bismillah, in the name of Allah." Adas, who was from a place called Nineveh, was taken aback. "The people of this land don't say these words," he said. The prophet asked where he was from. When Adas said he was a Christian from Nineveh, the prophet's face lit up. "From the town of the righteous man Yunus, the son of Matta," he said, referring to the prophet Jonah. Adas was stunned. "How do you know of Yunus?" he asked. No one in this part of Arabia should know that story. The prophet gave a simple, profound answer. "He is my brother. He was a prophet, and I am a prophet." In that instant, the young slave recognized the truth. Overwhelmed, Adas fell and kissed the bleeding feet and wounded hands of the man before him. In the hour of his greatest rejection, God sent him a sign. Not an army from the heavens, but the quiet, heartfelt belief of one sincere soul. A Christian slave from a faraway land who saw the truth when his own people had cast him out. It was a drop of mercy in an ocean of pain, a signal that his prayer had already been heard. The moment with Adas was a soothing balm, but the divine response to his prayer wasn't over. As the prophet and Zayd started the long walk back toward Mecca, something extraordinary happened. He looked up and saw a cloud hovering above him. From that cloud, the angel Gabriel appeared, the same angel who first brought him the revelation. Jibril's voice was solemn. He said, "Allah has heard what your people have said to you and how they have rejected you. He has heard your prayer." And Jibril wasn't alone. With him was the angel of the mountains. Jibril introduced him, saying, "Allah has sent him to you, so he will obey whatever you command." The angel of the mountains then greeted the prophet and made a terrifyingly powerful offer. "O Muhammad," he said, "if you wish, I will bring together the two mountains that surround Taif and crush everyone in the city between them." Just imagine that offer. Here was the ultimate revenge, served on a divine platter. The people who mocked him, stoned him, and made him bleed were now at his complete mercy. All he had to do was say the word. After the pain and humiliation he had just endured, a human response would be to accept. But Prophet Muhammad was Rahmatun lil Alameen, a mercy to all the worlds. He looked at the angel, and with a heart completely free of hatred, he gave a reply that would echo through eternity. "No," he said, Instead, I hope that Allah will bring forth from their descendants people who will worship Allah alone, associating no partners with Him. Think about the depth of that. He refused vengeance. His compassion extended not just to the people who had just tried to kill him, but to their unborn children and grandchildren. He prayed for their guidance, not their destruction. When offered absolute power, he chose absolute mercy. This was the real victory of Taif. It wasn't about converting a city. The victory was in the Prophet's character. When faced with the absolute worst of humanity, he responded with the very best of his prophetic mercy. He and Zaid continued their journey. He would eventually re-enter Mecca, not as a conqueror, but under the protection of a non-Muslim chief who was bound by honor to keep him safe. The path ahead was still difficult, but the journey to Taif, which looked like a failure, had forged his spirit and fire and confirmed the divine nature of his mission. He was pushed to the limit of human endurance and emerged not broken, but more certain and more compassionate than ever before. The story of Taif isn't really a story of failure. It's a profound lesson in what it means to keep faith when the world gives you every reason to lose it. It's a guide for resilience and a source of hope for anyone who has ever felt rejected, alone, or defeated. The Prophet's journey teaches us that worldly circumstances don't define us. His physical defeat at Taif was the launchpad for a spiritual victory that has inspired billions. His prayer shows us how to turn to God in our weakest moments, not with demands but with honesty, not with anger, but with trust in His plan. And his final choice, to forgive rather than condemn, shows that true strength isn't the power to crush your enemies, but the ability to pray for their children. We all face our own versions of Taif. We face rejection, humiliation, and moments of despair. In those moments, we have a choice. We can let bitterness consume us, or we can follow His example, raise our hands, have that honest conversation with our Creator, and trust that His approval is the only thing that truly matters. What was the most difficult day of your life? And what did you learn from it? If this story resonated with you, please share it with others who might need a message of hope. Like and subscribe for more stories that bring the lessons of the past into the present. And in the comments below, let us know one thing from this story that you'll carry with you. Finally, let us send our peace and blessings upon the man who taught us how to find light in the deepest darkness. Peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad,